Hello. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm a co host of the show along with Don Helmrich. This is our sixth episode, and our guest is Kat Klawes. We're going to be focusing on the mental health toll on advocates. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and my website. We're actually live on both of our Facebook pages and both of our Instagram accounts as well. So if you happen to be watching, please drop a note in the comments. Make sure you press play on the video in Facebook and Twitter, so we can see your comments and potentially put them on air. Dawn, thank you so much for being my partner in this. It really means a lot. It's having your support over the years, but then also for this series has really been incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been such a blessing. Show number six, we've done five of them so far, and every one of them has been really wonderful in its own way and very unique. I'm
And really the fact
excited
that
about
we're
today's show.
able to do these shows and we're looking at different aspects, different angles on mental health. We're looking at, we've talked about depression in the workplace. We've talked about the impact on our children. We've talked about the South Asian community and the impact on caregivers. Um, it really has been a range, and we had a really great show talking about how mental health issues play out for introverts and extroverts. That was an episode with Dawn's fiance, Jim Newberg. So I was particularly thrilled to do that. But this week, this episode, the second episode in April, we're going to be focusing on the mental health toll on advocates, particularly advocates for survivors of sexual assault and abuse. But I think, Don, that from our conversations around this and my own thinking about it, is that a lot of these issues apply to advocates of any area, of any type of work, in terms of the impact it has on people, the toll it takes, the mental kind of the weight that it puts on you.
Yeah,
Um,
I think people do advocacy work because they're passionate about something. And anytime you're passionate about something, especially if you have mental health challenges, when you really like put your whole heart and soul into something, it can be mentally exhausting and very draining, and yet at the same time very empowering and so well worth it. So I think this applies to anybody that's watching that has any type of passion in their lives, which I would say is probably everybody, right?
a, a lot of people, and it has, it also has an impact on, you know whether you're talking about mental health, whether you're talking about sexual assault. I'll say it frankly has been it's played out for me in my work with my church on a committee uh, dealing with it's a healthy relationships team. We're trying to help our community uh, you know work better together, but we also take on a lot ourselves, so it's challenging in both ways. I want to give a shout out, since it is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I want to put up a quick slide to remind people over half of all women and one in three men have experienced sexual violence involving physical contact in their lifetime. And that's from the New York State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence. You'll see these kind of stats in several places. Both Dawn and I are survivors of sexual assault and abuse, and Dawn, in your case, a much more violent experience with rape. Um, but I do want to give a shout out to our friend Candice Sanchez, who has a podcast, um, uh, conversations unspoken conversations with Candice. I co-hosted last year's season with her, focusing on male survivors of sexual abuse, and that really is what gave rise to this show, focusing on mental health. So I wanted to give Candace a quick shout out. Let's go ahead and welcome some of the folks who are watching, joining from all across the country. Our friend Jonathan is watching from the East Village. Jonathan, thank you for joining us. My our friend Apollo is watching from Philadelphia. He's glad to be here. We have two people watching from Hastings on Hudson, New York. In fact, two people from the same block. My mom on in Hastings on Hudson, wishing us good luck, and then our neighbor Rochelle Philippek, who's watching just up the street from where I grew up. And Rochelle is actually going to be a guest on our show later in the year. So thank you. Um, a special shout out. I don't know if Dane has had a chance to watch a show earlier. He may have one of the first ones, but Dane Elliott Lewis is a classmate of mine from high school, a high school classmate who's a year above me. Dane, thank you so much for your support, both messages you've sent, but also I know you watched a couple episodes last year when we were talking about male survivors, and that really means a lot to have that kind of support from old friends. Pradnya Haldapur is watching from Silver Spring, Maryland, not far from where I am in Springfield, Virginia. Thank you, Pradnya. We have another guest who's watching from not too far from where Dawn lives. Um, Jim Newberg is just
That
down the
is correct. Just about a door down. Yes.
but he's saying each episode is totally different, which I love, and we're doing an amazing job. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. And I say this every episode. He watches every episode. So supportive, Don. So incredibly supportive of what you're doing. But I am so thankful that you have found each other and that he is such an incredible source of love for you. You deserve every bit of it. Paula Kiger is watching from Tallahassee, Florida. Paula, thank you so much. I know that you're traveling, so it means a lot that you're able to log in for just a bit and say hi. Paula's another close friend of mine from Digimentors. And then Stefan Kaplan is watching live and has shared on all platforms. So appreciate that for this all important community and support group that we're growing. So thank you, Stefan. Encourage other folks to do the same. Um, Please like, comment, share. And let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And as I mentioned earlier, make sure you press play so that we can see your comments and put them on the screen. And Stefan reminds us that he's watching from Ramsey, New Jersey. So thank you, Stefan. With that, Dawn, before we bring on our guest, I want to take a moment. This has been a big week for a lot of folks, and I know for you in particular. And I wanted, if I may, I know it started off difficult this week. It was the fourth anniversary of your mom's passing earlier in the week on the 23rd. So again, my condolences for that. I know you shared so much about your mom in our last episode when Indira Samani was with us. So thank you for sharing that. Yesterday, as part of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, was Denim Day, which is what you and I first really connected around, an international day to show support for survivors of sexual assault. And you brought Denim Day to Milwaukee and really made it a thing. It's not just a quick photo. It's not just a quick, people wearing jeans and kind of maybe chatting about it. You get the mayors are the city is involved. They paint the city teal. They color the bridges and everything and the
They
buildings,
do.
and
They do.
they hang jeans from lampposts. Like
Yeah.
what's going on? Like it took over the city. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about
Crazy.
Denim Day, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so Denim Day is a day to support survivors of sexual assault. And it is a day that came about because of a woman in Italy who was wearing a tight pair of jeans and she was raped by her driving instructor. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court judge overturned it, saying that because she was wearing tight jeans, she was giving consent. And the women of the Italian parliament basically protested that by showing up in tight jeans to the parliament. And so Denim Day was born, and it filtered down to Los Angeles. and Los Angeles has been doing it for 25 years. And about 13 years ago, I heard about it and decided that it was something that our community really needed to embrace. And so it started out really, really small. And over the years, it's just sort of snowballed and gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And now it is something that, you know, pretty much happens on its own. I don't really do anything but show up when I'm asked to show up, where I'm asked to show up. So it was like watching my baby grow up and become a teenager. So it's really, really been cool to watch.
which is great. The other big event that happened last night was Hope Shining Blue, which I had a chance to go to last year and attend in person. Uh, you are a Thrive Award honoree from Aurora Counseling. Our guest, Kat Klawes, was an honoree in 2022. Tell us a little bit about Hope Shining Blue.
Yeah, Hope Shining Blue is amazing. It's a fundraising effort for our local healing center, which is a counseling service for women and men who have been sexually assaulted. It's specifically focused on that. It's free counseling. And every year they do a fashion show where survivor models walk a runway dressed in to the nines in clothes that they pick out that they feel comfortable in. And then there are several award winners, but the Thrive Award winner is a survivor that has really made great efforts to make the world a better place, basically. And what you're seeing right here is a picture of 7 or 8 of us, I think, or 6 or 7 of us that have been past Thrive Award winners. I was the first one in 2014. Kat was in 2022. And we were 6 of us or 7 of us were able to make it last night to be there, and it was an amazing event. And Kat is front and center. You'll be meeting her shortly. And I happen to have these. Somebody put these teal heart glasses on my desk yesterday, and I brought them. I brought them to the event, and they were perfect because every one of us as Thrivers got a pair of them, and we were able to take pictures with them. It was really cool.
That's just so great. That's so great. Well, you were talking about Kat. Before we bring her on, I want to just frame our discussion just a little bit. And first, you wrote a blog post, Dawn, talking about the toll that advocacy takes and your journey as an advocate. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, so I've spoken at the Capitol on multiple occasions, and every time it's really it's a challenge, but it's so worth it. And Kat's going to really speak to this really well about how when you're doing something like that, and when you're testifying for a bill and you're sharing your story, knowing that things that had happened to you or experiences that you had could be different for somebody else because of what you're testifying about or what you're sharing is really such an important aspect of empowerment when it comes to advocacy work. But it does take a toll, and I've shared with you, Neil, that sometimes when I go and do this, it's hours upon hours upon hours of waiting. They throw your name in a hat basically, and depending upon when your bill comes up, they pull names out for people to come and testify. And there's really, it's a bit of a waiting game, which when you're a survivor and you have like a really important message and story to tell, that can be really, really nerve wracking, and it can really take a toll on your mental health. But at the end of the day, the importance of that work continues to drive me, and I know continues to drive Kat because she does a lot more of it than I do, to do that kind of legislative advocacy work. But I think all kinds of advocacy, it doesn't just have to be legislative. It's any type of advocacy work. um is a lot of mental work
Sure,
that we all do,
sure.
and really taking care of ourselves at the sometimes I have to like focus on one issue, do that one issue, and then step away. So but I really am excited to have Kat come on. So
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and show Kat's blog post to tee up her coming on. she wrote a piece about the mental health journey from action to advocacy. And she said, I found that engaging in advocacy work helped to combat feelings of powerlessness and helped me and others like me rebuild a sense of agency and control. With that, let's welcome Kat Klawes to our program. Kat, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
It's so great to have you, and we definitely want to hear about your advocacy work, your experience as well. You're both all three of us are survivors and advocates. Um, Tell us a little bit about your story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so my story started when I was very young. I am both a childhood survivor of sexual assault and an adult survivor. I was sexually assaulted by a neighbor when I was approximately 7 years old. And that neighbor went on to assault other little girls like me. And so uh, there's something to be said about the effects of trauma, especially when you're so young and your innocence there. And then I was a sexual assault survivor when I was in college for a second time in my life. And that's a part of my story that I think I talk about the most because as an adult, I stumbled into advocacy as a way of healing and reclaiming my power.
Which is great, and I want to just mention. I actually hadn't. Hearing about your story, I don't think I focused on the fact that you were 7 when you were first abused. That's how old I was when I was abused, also by a neighbor. So it really that definitely struck a chord with me. Um, the other part of your story that I thought was really interesting was your work at college, when you started speaking up and finding a voice and talking about mental health issues. Can you talk a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah. So after my sophomore year of college, I was sexually assaulted by the second time in my life by a stranger. And I want to make a quick comment on there that when I was a kid, I was always taught stranger danger. And so when I was assaulted by somebody close to me, that was really hard for me to reckon with because we teach children and sometimes we teach adults that what you have to fear is the unknown people, despite the fact that most people who harm others are known to them in some way, friends, family, etc., somebody in their community. But I was assaulted by a stranger, and seeing the different reactions I got from people that I got when I was a child when I would speak about it was kind of telling by what people thought, that they were more likely to be sympathetic to somebody who was assaulted by a stranger than somebody they knew.
Yeah.
Additionally, I had words to talk about how it was impacting me. When I was a 7-year-old child, I got quiet. I didn't tell anybody. And I lived in a very small town, so it was very well known, and I knew other people who were harmed by this individual. But back then, we didn't talk about it. And the second time that I was assaulted, I knew that I wouldn't survive if I didn't talk about the assault. I knew I wouldn't survive if I didn't speak out. And so I started speaking out. I tried to do everything right. I went to the University Counseling Center. I got good grades. I was very involved in student life. And in that year, I got an email from the Dean of Students telling me that I would face expulsion if I continued talking about the sexual assault and my mental health. To be clear, at that time, they were worried that I was a suicide risk. I was not. But what it sent to me and what this email said is it basically felt like a gag order, that the university didn't like how I was shedding them shedding negative light on them, and that they wanted to sweep sexual assault under the rug, which is a story I've now had many, many times over. But as you can imagine, it made me pull away from my friends at a time when I needed them the most.
Yeah, that's I just want to step in if you
Yeah,
don't mind, Neil.
yeah, of
Um,
course.
yeah, when I hear your story, and I've heard stories that where other individuals in college have faced that same challenge,
Mhm.
sometimes about just mental health in general, sometimes about sexual assault. Can you talk a little bit about the advocacy work that you've done and that you are doing in relationship to those college campuses that you're trying to help with?
Yeah. So when this story first started, I was approximately 20, 21 years old. And this is in the middle of the Me Too movement. And I feel like that kind of springboarded what I tried to do. And so what I just did is I started speaking out. I started talking to newspapers about my story. First of all, how the assault impacted my life, how it was impacting my mental health, and specifically how the university was harming me when they were attempting, supposedly, to support survivors in mental health on campuses. And what I found was quite shocking. Over 100 individuals in a 10-year frame at my university had received the same email I had, threatening me with expulsion for speaking about their mental health. And I knew that it was illegal. So what we did is we did a whole bunch of advocacy days on campus called I Care Days, where people wrote I care on their skin. We had people signing petitions. We had 2,000 people sign a petition within 3 days in a very small school. And I started talking to newspapers about it. And as I mentioned, this is during the Me Too movement. And so I got to connect to survivors across the country who are combating the same kind of things that I'm talking about, this need by universities to sweep sexual assault under this rug, this big sense of power that universities have, that they think that they can control their students in this way and stifle free speech. And so I knew that this was an issue that was going to change my life. I wasn't sure how it would, but I knew that this issue was too big for me to ignore. And ever since then, I have done advocacy. I started small in the state of Michigan. I met with a state representative and wrote a bill to try to create an ombudsman office, which means an oversight office at the state level, to stop universities from silencing people, whether it's about mental health, sexual assault, hazing, other topics that universities are constantly running afoul of if you read the newspapers. I cannot tell you how many cases I've seen in Michigan where I went to college, here in Wisconsin where I'm from, or just across the nation where it seems like universities specifically are continuously failing sexual assault survivors. And the Me Too movement was great. It raised a lot of awareness. It brought my case to the front page of the New York Post and the Huffington Post. I was in national newspapers at the age of 21 and being asked what solutions we have. And the biggest solution I can think of is giving a platform and voice to survivors, and letting them create the change, which is what I've been doing now, is helping raise people's voices from impacted communities, whether it's survivors, people experiencing homelessness, other issues like that, to people who can make decisions and create change.
That's amazing, Kat. I mean, so such important work that you're doing. So as you know, the show is about mental health, and
Yeah.
I'm curious if you've experienced any mental health challenges while doing this, if there are things that you've had to deal with, and ways that you might cope with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Dawn. And I think that that's something that's not talked a lot about, the intersection of mental health, advocacy, and, sexual assault survivors. I have always had an anxiety disorder my entire life. I wasn't formally diagnosed, or I was diagnosed with a few different things. Currently been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. And that's been a part of my life as long as I can remember. I never knew what it was to be calm or not have these repetitive fears that would keep me up at night. And some of that could be related to the assault I had as a child. I will never know because I, experienced trauma at such a young age. But as it relates to advocacy, I think one of the hardest things as an impacted person who's experienced trauma when doing this advocacy is that to create change, you have to make it personal and you have to connect it to your story. And so, as you mentioned when we were coming on here, sometimes you'll be at the Capitol waiting for 4 hours to tell a deeply personal story to a room full of 100 strangers. You're not sure when you're going to go on, and you only have 3 minutes to really bare your soul and create long-lasting change in the legislature. And sometimes you can do everything right. You can tell a true story, you can talk about your pain, and then nothing happens. So I think that's one of the hardest parts for me, especially as somebody with OCD. I literally obsess over things that I do wrong, and I'm a perfectionist to a fault. And so sometimes I ruminate on things and take it very personally if I have a survivor who shares their story to try to create change and it goes nowhere. It's a really big letdown, and it can be really demotivating to keep hearing no, 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 no. I like to joke in my career that I'm a professional complainer. That's literally my job, is to complain all day and make things better. But there's such an emotional toll in that, in dealing with the negative day in and day out to try to create change.
Kat, I'll tell you that some of the things that you're talking about, being a perfectionist, having a little bit of OCD, how you respond to different things. one of the things that we talked about on our show last year, that Candice Sanchez hosted, that I co-hosted, was how a lot of those issues are direct. There's a direct line from having a trauma experience, from being abused, to responding in those ways. I share a lot of those issues around being a perfectionist, about kind of being overwhelmed, and this week was hard for me. I'll share. I put it out there in some social media posts, but I didn't do everything that I wanted to do promoting this show. I didn't do it when I wanted to do it, and it weighed on me, and it really felt like a weight on my chest. At some point, I had to just let it go, and I was able to, but not till like today. Like it took that long to get through it. And I have a few other things that I was kind of dealing with, but I certainly understand what you're saying with that. I want to bring in a couple of comments from folks who are watching. Apollo says that, Kat, finding your words to express your experience and trauma is empowerment. It's a form of empowerment, certainly. And a former colleague of mine at United Way Worldwide, when I worked there in Alexandria, Virginia, Alyssa Tierney, who now lives in Colorado. The threat of expulsion for speaking out at your university speaking out at your university is absurd. That's exactly what I thought when I heard that part of the story. Thank you for persevering in advocacy, Kat. My mom says, Sudha Parekh, Kat, you are doing very important work in communicating it on different platforms about sexual abuse. You are creating awareness. Um, We've mentioned her several times so far, but Candice Sanchez, another Thrive Award honoree, another Milwaukee area resident. Kat does a great advocacy training program regarding the legislative process. I learned so much. And she says OCD. Yes, I felt that, Kat, so familiar with that. And Candice had a front row seat to my OCD dealing with the show last year. So thank you, Candice. Perfectionist, right? Neil, we talked about this. You're not alone. We both deal with that. And Apollo says, as a former foster kid here, getting my anxiety addressed took 20 years off my life. So I really do appreciate what you're sharing. We have one other person that checked in. I want to make sure that we acknowledge that they're watching. Dawn, this increases the number of people watching at a single address. I talked about two people on the same block in Hastings. We have three people watching from the same house. Kate
That's
Easton
impressive.
is downstairs watching. I had a chance to meet Kate when I was in Milwaukee last year. And Dawn and Jim live upstairs in the upstairs apartment there. Kate, thank you so much for joining us and watching. We really appreciate it. I want to make sure, Dawn, that you saw some of the comments that Candice left for you, your mom, sending you love. She's smiling upon you. We talked about Dawn's mom having passed away 4 years ago. And Apollo shared his condolences as well. And Stefan said that every community needs to support and call attention to Denim Day. That is the most absurd thing that I ever heard of, the Italian court case that inspired it. And he learned about it through me and Dawn at a prior event. Um, I like Apollo's comment. Thrive Award and Denim Day are really cool. Okay, but what's better? Dawn changing the world around her. And I would throw in Dawn, Kat, and in my own way, we are all trying to take uh, our experience and what we um, uh, what we saw firsthand, and trying to make something of it. And at times it's hard. And at times we need to retreat. I'll be the first one to say that I spent some time Sunday afternoon under my heated blanket. Yes, it's like 60 degrees now, but still, that heated blanket felt really good when I just couldn't get my work done. It definitely helped. Dawn, you have another question for Kat?
I do have another question for Kat. So, Kat, you and I had this conversation when we had the prep call with Neil about the fact that a lot of times people attach our mental health to our trauma. And that is not necessarily the case. I have experienced anxiety and depression my whole entire life. The the trauma that I experienced intensified that anxiety and depression, but it was not what caused it to begin
Yeah.
with. And so I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that, because I think you talked about that so well on our prep call.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that is hard for a lot of survivors to even talk about because it's very common. For me, particularly, people always assume that my OCD it stems from the assault. I've also been diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and people are more understanding of one where there's one big event that they can say, "Oh, it makes sense that you have this because of your assault." I also seem like there's some kind of a misconception about mental health conditions that you must have some easily identifiable trauma that they can point to and say that's why you have this, rather than understanding that mental health conditions can happen for a variety of ways. Some it's genetic, some can happen with life circumstances that we talked about, some can happen other ways throughout your life, and they come at different points in your life. And I don't think a lot of people know that that happens, and also how to support people who might have complex mental health conditions like myself. A lot of support that I get for my mental health conditions really focuses around the assault and that trauma. And I absolutely appreciate that. And it warms my heart to see when family and friends reach out to me in that way. But on the other side, when I have things not related to the trauma of the assault, things related to obsessive compulsive disorder that I have had my whole life and that are a little bit harder to understand for some people because they're not attached to that big traumatic event, I feel like I don't get the same understanding, or at least not the same outreach that I would get. And I think that's because the way we talk about mental health is flawed. We're always looking for a reason why. Everybody understands why I have PTSD because of the assault of when I was a child and when I was an adult. That makes sense to them. But some mental health conditions, there is no why. It's just the way that I am. And with my OCD, I'm not currently medicated, and I've been managing it for most of my life. And so to me, it's a part of who I am. Some people call mental health conditions disorders. And I don't think of it as a disorder, at least not to me. It is challenging sometimes, but it's a part of who I am. And I'm really on a journey to love all pieces of myself. And so, like I said, it's not always easy. And there are really difficult parts to deal with. But thank you for bringing up that point between intersection in trauma and mental health conditions and how they're not always related to trauma, even for those who have experienced trauma.
Yeah, I think that's a really big thing for me because, what my situation, my trauma happened when I was 21, and anytime that and I'm so vocal about it, right? Like same with you, Kat, right? Like everybody attaches my everything that I do to that trauma, and I put myself out there, so that's to be expected.
Mhm.
However, I can be sad and depressed and feel anxiety over things that have absolutely nothing to do with my trauma, and people still related to that. They're still like, well, of course you feel that way, you experienced something so awful, you should feel that way. And sometimes I'm like, no, I just had a really crappy week. Like, this doesn't have anything to do with anything. I'm just feeling sad
Yeah.
because my mom, or because my life circumstances, or whatever it may be. And the other thing I was going to say is that I think sometimes we don't really know what the reason is,
Yeah.
right, Kat? Like, and
Yeah.
Neil too. Like, you can't always. If I could pinpoint why I was feeling really anxious half the time, I probably wouldn't feel anxious, right?
Yeah.
I think for me, what has been challenging, what I've been experiencing even lately, is I'll have these. I feel like I'm in these cycles that
Mhm.
every week or so, or every 2 weeks, there's something that is weighing me down, and it
Mhm.
keeps me down for a couple days, and I'm still able to function. And this I'm really challenged by this, because if I start talking about it, and for folks who may not have been watching the earlier episodes, until we launched this show, Kat, I never said word one about having anxiety and depression. I
Mhm.
never talked about seeing a therapist. I was too afraid. I thought the stigma was too much, that
Mhm.
if I actually shared that I dealt with these challenges. And what I'm finding now that I'm talking about it a little bit, part of the flip side is, if I say that I'm dealing with depression, if I've struggled for the past few days, um, the impression that I think, there's like a meme about like what I think is happening, what other people think is
Yeah.
happening, what's reality, right? I think that people hear that and assume, oh, I guess Neil was in bed catatonic for the last 3 days and just not
Mhm.
able to do anything. And that's not exactly
Yeah.
the situation. I mean, it's almost like being a functional alcoholic or something, where you can get some things done, you can work through. There are just certain things you can't do, and there are certain things that
Yeah.
are just like, you're just like, feel like walking through water at times. But what was getting me was that I feel like I've been there before. Like I had these
Mhm.
feelings, and I was telling my therapist last session, yesterday, um, feeling it again. What's going on? Like I
Mhm.
just went through this last week. Why is it back? You
Yeah.
know, that's the hard part. That's the
No,
hard part.
I appreciate you bringing that up and kind of Dawn talking about how it's represented. I think the reason that a lot of people have this misconception about what mental health conditions look like or trauma is how we talk about it in TV and movies. And that was actually the hardest part for me with my diagnosis. I finally got the diagnosis of OCD and PTSD in my mid 20s after it changed different diagnoses and I saw different counselors. Um, and the reason I didn't think I have OCD is because when I saw it represented in TV and movies, it was people who do repetitive physical motions. And I
Yeah.
saw these really big stereotypes there. And I thought that everybody who had OCD or PTSD was highly medicated. And I'm absolutely in support of medication. Everybody has different treatment plans that they need. But because I was able to manage without medication, I thought that it meant that I didn't have OCD. And so I think that it's so important for podcasts like this or individuals who are comfortable to talk about their mental health journey and their trauma journey in a real way that is not Hollywood. That showcases the real reality of what it's like living with either trauma or, a mental health condition.
Apollo has a great comment I want to bring in, Dawn. He says, yes, Kat, loving yourself, the person I was born and the person I am today and hope to be tomorrow, are radical actions, because you love all of you.
Yeah.
And just embracing all of the contradictions and all of the facets of your life, and how you show up and how you present yourself in, at your best and at your worst.
Yeah.
But being okay with that is
Mhm.
certainly a challenge.
And I'm
Alyssa,
still working on that
please
one.
don't.
Me
Oh,
too.
I don't
I'm
know
a
that anyone's.
constant work in process. That is for sure.
I don't. We think we've either of us have figured that out. Alyssa says walking through water, a phrase that I used a few minutes ago, is such a great way to describe how depression can feel.
Mhm.
And yes, sometimes those feelings come out of nowhere.
Mhm.
Alyssa, thank you so much for sharing that. I I uh, I'm pausing only because I'm very close. I feel, even though I haven't seen them in years, still feel very close to Brian and Alyssa, two colleagues of mine at
Mhm.
United Way Worldwide. And as much as we shared, it's a great example of someone that I wouldn't have said anything about being depressed or having anxiety in the workplace. We talked about that a few episodes ago. But Alyssa, I'm so glad that you've been able to watch the last few episodes and that you shared that on the show. It means a lot. Um, our friend Rose Horowitz, another Digimentor's colleague, is watching from Connecticut. So I want to give Rose a shout out. And Marilyn Zafert is also watching on Instagram. So thank you, Marilyn. I'm going to take the moment, Dawn, since I mentioned a few of our colleagues. The show is produced by Digimentors on a pro bono basis. And it means a lot that our company, my colleagues Sri Srinivas and the rest of our leadership team, but also the other consultants that we work with, not only give me the time and space to do the show, but also show up and comment and watch and share and engage in the program. Digimentors is a social and digital agency focusing on digital marketing, events, and digital programs. We do strategic communications, trainings, and workshops. We also do staffing and recruiting. We're doing a lot of work around AI and around event amplification. So thank you again to my colleagues at Digimentors. It really means a lot to have their support.
Yeah, I was just
Please.
gonna say, Candace put a lot of words in
Yeah,
her comment, and I was just gonna sum it up because it's kind of hard to put on the screen.
yeah.
But basically, Candace, what you're talking about is, really having those feelings that we all have, and how they stockpile. And what I really like about your comment is that you said you're thankful because you're giving yourself grace and you have some tools in your toolbox that are allowing you to feel your feels. And I say that all the time, like, Dawn, just feel your feels. Like, it's okay. You can feel your feels. And I think that that's really important. And we could do an entire show about menopause. Let me tell you, we're not even going to bring it up here because I'll tell you what, that is something that Candace and I share a lot of information about. And I think Neil's been in the room a couple of times with some of the other guests who have experienced the same thing.
Yep.
But yeah, it's a real thing. That's a real thing.
It absolutely is. And, Don, was certainly open to having a more complete conversation about that. Just so folks know that Dawn and I started this show in February with an idea of we'll just see how it goes and see who is interested in being on the show, what kind of guests we get. I'm so thrilled to say that we've almost filled out our calendar for 2024. We have a couple of slots open toward the end of the year, and a number of other people who've expressed interest in being on the show. And it still, every time we do a show, more people reach out. So it's very likely we will be doing the show next year in 2025. And there's no reason why we can't do a specific show around mental health and the issues around menopause and perimenopause and how it impacts women at a certain stage in their life. I certainly look forward to that conversation. We have some time left in the show, so I definitely want to uh, uh, keep things going. I do want to make sure that we share some resources with folks, Don. We have some stats that we share from NAMI. 1 in 5 adults suffer or have suffered from mental illness at some point in time. And it's one thing that I'm proud that we do every show, that we make sure people have resources and they know who to reach out to. So you can go to the NAMI website, nami.org. You could also call their helpline, 1-800-950-6264, if you need help. So I certainly encourage you to do that. We also have some data points from Mental Health America. 18% of adults have a mental health condition. That's over 43 million Americans. Let's take a moment on that. 43 million Americans have some sort of mental health condition, it's staggering, and how many of those people are not able to talk about it, not able to get the help they need, are afraid of the impact it might have in the workplace if they share their challenges. Mental Health America can be reached at mhanational.org, mhanational.org. And they also have you can text 988 to get help. Call or text 988. And then again, as a reminder, it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. Every 68 seconds. And that's from the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. And their website and hotline are on the screen below. 800-656-HOPE, 800-656-HOPE. Their website is rain.org, RAINN.org. Our guest is Kat Klawes, and we are thrilled that you were able to join us for this show. We still have some time to dig into some of these issues. We're talking about the impact that advocacy, the mental health impact on advocates, particularly around people who are advocating for survivors of sexual assault. I'll share that last year, when I did the show with Candice, it was, oh my God, overwhelming. Dawn knows that I was a mess before our first episode, and it was really strange because Candice and I had pre-recorded my episode. We pre-recorded most of the episodes. So it was like recorded 3 months ahead. But I shared a blog post where I came out. I shared my experience of being abused, and had the episode air. And I was so stressed going into every episode. It took like 3 or 4 months before I could just kind of go with each episode and not be a ball of nerves each time. So there's that same process of kind of being overwhelmed and being empowered. And I remember at one point, I like the first episode and the second episode, I stepped out and talked to Pam, my wife, and said, "Oh my God, this is so much." And she was really worried that, like, is this what it's going to be like every month? Is it going to like completely destroy me? And luckily that didn't happen. Same thing, Dawn, has happened with this show. Our first episode, I remember you and I were talking about how stressed we were. The muscles in my shoulders and my neck, it was like completely like hard as a rock. And each week, I keep saying week, but each episode, 2 times a month, a different experience with putting out the posts and writing the blog post and promoting it and how I feel about it. But eventually we are starting to figure out how to be okay with whatever it goes. Did you find that, Kat, in terms of the overall arc, in terms of, with your advocacy work, difficult at first and then you started getting used to it? What was your experience like that?
Yeah, I would say actually the advocacy is the easiest part of my healing journey, which is really surprising to me. Not to say that I haven't felt fear in speaking out or that I haven't gotten negative comments before. But I found a lot of my power, empowerment, and healing from advocacy, from taking this really awful thing that had happened to me and turning the narrative and taking back my power. This power was in sharing my story. This power was creating change so survivors like me never have to go through what I went through at my university. And there's taking great comfort in that. And so I see that happen all the time with survivors. I work with a lot of different policy areas, including survivors, and having people who have been hurt or harmed in some way, or who just want to make a difference, and seeing the reaction as they share their story, as they realize that their voice has power. And if we're lucky, if we get to create change, is my favorite part of it. And so I think that's why I wanted to do this podcast, is to share about how sometimes it may be scary, but at least in my personal experience and those that I've worked with, advocacy isn't often thought of a healing tool. We talk about journaling, we talk about yoga, and all these other great things that are a part of a great toolkit to help survivors heal from trauma. But there's the most important one, which is advocacy with decision makers. That could be elected officials. That could be your county Department of Human Services. Whoever it is can create change. There is something completely very healing for individuals when they can make change for others.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I talked about the difficulty that I've had, with some of my own mental health challenges with advocacy. But when I think about advocacy in a different way, other than legislative, like my work organizing Denim Day and my work with, speaking out at campuses and that's really empowering for me. Like telling my story and talking about and educating people around eradicating victim blaming and the way that people talk to survivors of sexual assault. I always say that, like, if somebody gets in a car accident and they break their arm, you don't say to them, well, why'd you get in the car? Right? Like, that's not the first thing that comes out. Like, they were in the car, they were in an accident. It's not their fault. But yet that's one of the first things that happens with survivors of sexual assault, is that they are questioned in every aspect of everything that they did, regardless of whether, it was stranger rape or someone they knew, or they were a child or an adult. there's always this like, I would have done it different than you kind of mentality. So that type of advocacy, for me, does the same thing, I think, is what your legislative work does for you, Kat. It's very empowering for me to know that I can help educate people on the right things to say when someone discloses to you that they have been assaulted. And I always say that it is, if somebody discloses to you that they've been assaulted, you should feel so honored because they trust you enough to share the most intimate thing and the most personal thing with you. So you better make sure you know how to tackle that. You better make sure that you can say to them, I believe you. I am so sorry that happened to you. I understand that, you know, that I feel honored and blessed that you shared that with me. So I totally get that aspect of it, Kat, how empowering that can really be.
Yeah. And I think this discussion is very timely because nationally, funding for sexual assault survivors at a federal level has been cut by 40 to 60% in certain departments. And this federal money goes down to states and nonprofit organizations and counties and cities, et cetera. And so I think that we're seeing what happens when survivors aren't heard, that I've spoken to so many elected officials, state representatives, et cetera, who don't think sexual assault is a problem in their districts, who haven't heard about the impact of survivors. So we don't have funding for things like the Aurora Healing Center. We don't have funding for things like Lotus Legal Clinic or other really great nonprofits that federal funding is being decreased for. And so that's just one example of what impact survivor stories can have is on funding. But there's also so many things and policies and laws that can be changed, or training of, just like Dawn said, of how to react if somebody discloses to you that they have been a survivor of trauma.
Yeah, and I think that training piece is really essential. When people ask me, like I did an interview yesterday with our local news station, and they said, like, what's one thing that you know people can do to educate others? And I said, train your law enforcement officers, train your first responders, train train staff at organization, train nurses. Because those are the people that come in contact with survivors that really need to understand that there's a good way and a bad way to approach people. And I'll tell you that the way in which you react to me when I disclose that information really changes the trajectory of our relationship and how we can interact together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I want to bring in a few more folks who are watching. Patricia Kitchen is watching from New York City, another colleague from Digimentors. Thank you, Patricia. Jonathan left this comment. I'm finding that as something becomes a routine, if not a checklist, it reduces anxiety and depression. Thank you, Jonathan. Alyssa is sharing something she heard earlier. I believe you. Three incredibly important words, which is so true. Believe survivors is just it's a mantra, but it means so much when you just tell someone that, whether they're talking about an abuse history or trauma experience, or whether they're sharing where they are in their own mental health journey, and you just accept it at face value that what they're sharing is true and it's true for them. You don't question it. Dawn, Jim loves Kat too, I think. You're truly inspiring. Thank you for all the work you do, as you should.
Jim is great. Thank you, Jim.
He is great. Apollo says that the show is phenomenal and groundbreaking. Thank you, Apollo. That means a lot. My mom shares that victims get victimized again by others, and that is true, depending on how they are, how people respond to them. Many people find fault with victims or those who suffered due to any reason. And Apollo says, Dawn, disclosure of mental health and trauma is an honor. It's a judicious decision, and that's important. And I agree with that. I do want to mention that our next show is going to be May 9th. We are live the second and fourth Thursdays of the month. It's a decision Dawn and I made when we were talking about the show. What's the right balance between a monthly conversation and weekly. I produce another weekly show, as many folks might know, the Sunday New York Times read along. We've been doing that for 8 years. Sree's been doing it for 8 years. I've been helping him for 6.5. Weekly would have been a little much for this topic, so it gives us a chance. We have the show, we have a week to kind of prepare and decompress and think about the upcoming show. And so our next guest is going to be Kate Easton. We're going to be focusing on parenting a child with mental health challenges. Thank you, Kate, for joining us. I remember from our very first episode, Kate watched and said that she would be willing to join us. And so she will be joining us on Thursday, May 9th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central, and 4 p.m. Pacific. So we will have another episode with 3 people from the same address on the show. I don't know how we can top that. That's challenging. That is challenging. I want to say Carolyn is watching from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Carolyn, thank you so much. Carolyn is a old family friend of my relatives. She actually watched my cousins when they were growing up in Long Island. So Carolyn, thank you so much. Really appreciate you logging on. If folks are joining late, I want to let you know that you can watch the show from the beginning on the channels that you're watching, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on my website. And then just shortly after, because I have to do a couple of things to get the video up on Instagram, you can also watch it on Instagram if you want to. So you'll be able to watch from the very beginning and catch this great discussion with Kat Klawes, who is both an advocate and a survivor. And of course, we've been talking about the impact that advocacy plays on our mental health as advocates. Kat, as we begin to wrap up, any final thoughts that you want to share with folks? Anything that you didn't get a chance to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to share the idea that advocacy is a scary word. Everybody always thinks that means necessarily going to politicians or elected officials or things like that. Advocacy is just asking for change to decision makers. It could be big or it could be small. It could be talking to your local police department and offering to do a training. It could be writing a letter to the editor talking about how you want survivor voices uplifted on Denim Day, or just asking them to cover the story. You don't even have to be a part of the story. Big or small, I think together we can change the narrative about how we support survivors and how we talk about mental health.
That's great. Thank you so much.
No,
Dawn,
thank you for having me.
any thoughts? Any thoughts, Dawn?
Yeah, I would second that. I'll say there's, how people say there's like little p and big P for politics. There's little a and big P for advocacy too. And little a is just as important as the big A. You don't have to go and testify at the Capitol in order to make a difference, in order to make change. I say that there's room for everyone in advocacy. There's room for everyone in organizing. I always say, like, if you want to stuff envelopes for me, if that's the thing that you want to do to get the word out, and that is your piece, what you can do, that is just as important as me standing up on a podium and giving my soapbox speech for how important raising awareness around sexual violence is for me, I would say.
Absolutely. I'm going to let our viewers have some of the last words. Jonathan says, great show as always. Wish I could catch more of them. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. We have my mom saying, thank you, Kat, Dawn, and Neil. Very good show. Highly educational. Alyssa saying, thank you again for our advocacy work. And Apollo saying, I want to do advocacy, but I'm unsure where to start. Kat, I'm going to turn that over to you. What advice would you have for Apollo if he's interested in doing some advocacy around, any topic, but potentially mental health issues, since I know that's something that Apollo has spoken about in the past?
Yeah, so I am very biased, but I'm a volunteer for NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, specifically Southeast Wisconsin, and I have been volunteering there for about 8 years, teaching mental health units to students. So that's a good way to get involved. They give you all the training, but also NAMI or these national organizations can give you training on advocacy. NAMI has, and they're on all 50 states, specific trainings on how to advocate to your elected officials to ask for things for like more mental health funding at your state and good things like that. There's many organizations that do that as well. And then my second ask is if people want to get involved, right now, specifically this year, there is the biggest budget shortfall for survivor supporting organizations that we've had since the 1970s. So for those who are able, I hope that you find a charity close to home, local to you, that could use those dollars, since federal funding cuts are going to impact and cut and limit services for survivors like myself. I am where I am in my healing journey today because I get free counseling through the Aurora Healing Center, which has allowed me to have healthy relationships, move on past the trauma, coping skills, all these great things. And programs like that and many others that survivors rely on across the country are at risk of closing because of a lack of federal funds. So first of all, please uplift your voice on a federal level and talk to Congress people about the need to fund supportive survivor services. And then second of all, in your community, look at organizations who are helping survivors, whether it's a domestic violence organization, other groups like that, that you could either volunteer with, or if you have any funding to give, consider this year specifically to keep those doors open.
Absolutely. I'd certainly encourage that as well. Apollo says, thank you for your testimonials. You made an awesome impact tonight, and blessings to you all. And I think we can close with Kate's comment. So much appreciate sharing that the little A's are just as important. Kate, of course, will be our guest on May 9th, our next episode of Shining Light on Shadows. With that, Kat, I want to thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time. Dawn, as always, this has been a great experience, and I'm so glad that we were able to have you join us during Sexual Assault Awareness Month in April. We look forward to seeing everyone in May. Dawn, May is Mental Health Awareness Month.
It
So
is.
we will have a lot to talk about in our 2 May episodes. Thanks again, and
Thanks, Kat.
give yourself grace.
Mhm.
Give yourself grace.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.